In his book, Love Beyond Reason, Pastor John Ortberg tells this story. I'm just going to read you the story that he tells. He says, a few years ago, I went to play golf with some friends. Something I do very rarely and very badly. On the first hole, I lined up to hit the ball, which looks so easy when it's done on TV. After all, the ball's not even moving. As I hit a shank which defied belief, it went off at a 90-degree angle. It was astounding. He said no one had ever seen a golf ball go off at that trajectory before. And we weren't sure up to that point that it was physically possible. He says, I wished so badly I could have that one back again. He says, in parentheses, it hit the slate roof of a nearby townhome and sounded like it may have done some damage. As I started tracking down the ball so I could hit my next shot, when the people I was playing with said an amazing thing. They said, don't bother. Let it go. They told me to take what is called a mulligan. You don't have to play the unplayable lie, they said. You don't have to count it. We won't write it down. It won't appear on the scorecard. It will be as if it never happened, they said. Irrelevant to my ultimate score. I was given a clean slate, a fresh beginning. I could start over as if for the first time. A mulligan is a kind of grace note in the otherwise unforgiving game. He says, and I started thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to take mulligans in other areas of life? Imagine a policeman stops you for speeding. You just tear the ticket up. Thanks, officer. I'll be taking my mulligan. Right you are, he says. The bank tells you your check bounced. Mulligan, you tell them. No problem, they say. In an argument with a friend, you say something you shouldn't. Mulligan. Botch a test. Blow a presentation at work. Invest in the wrong company. Commit an embarrassing faux pas. Forget to send in taxes. Just take a mulligan. No questions asked. No penalties assigned. Now, I don't play golf. I know a couple of you do play golf. But this idea of a mulligan sounds really, really good, doesn't it? It is good. Dan can confirm that mulligans are good things. Now, God doesn't give us mulligans in that sense, per se. But God does give us second chances. God gives us second chances even when we don't deserve it. Even when we've completely blown it. Our God is a God of second chances. And nowhere, I think, is that more clear than in the story of Jonah. And so as we continue our study of this brief little book, we're going to see how God gave Jonah a second chance. How He gave the city of Nineveh a second chance. And how He can give us a second chance too. So Jonah chapter 3, verse 1, the first thing we'll see here is that God gave Jonah a second chance. Verse 1. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it the message that I tell you. So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh, according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, 3 days' journey in breadth. So Jonah, if you've been with us in our study of Jonah so far, Jonah's been through a lot. Okay? God had called him to go to Nineveh. He ran away. He boarded a ship. There was a bad storm. He got thrown off that ship. He was drowning in the water. He got swallowed by a fish. And he lay in the fish for 3 whole days. As he lays there, soaking in the gastric acid, right, seaweed trying to strangle his neck, wondering why he's not dead yet, Jonah finally turned from his rebellion. And he turned towards God. And the fish spit him out, and he washed up on the shore in this nasty, disgusting mess that he was. As Jonah gathers himself and begins to put his life back together, something eerily familiar happens. He hears God say to him. He says, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, call out against it the message I tell you." And if you've been tracking with us, this is an almost verbatim repetition of the same thing God commanded him back at the beginning of the story. As if God was telling him, "Jonah, in the belly of the fish, you said you were going to follow me. Here's your chance." So what would Jonah do? What would you do? Because the situation in Nineveh had not changed. Nineveh was still the capital city of Israel's arch nemesis. I can't speak. Arch nemesis of Syria. This is like Pyongyang, North Korea. Tehran, Iran. Bad, bad place. Nineveh still had a brutally violent culture. I think we mentioned last time that one of the Assyrian emperors kept a mound of skulls. Another one was known for cutting the lips of his victims off. And I bet Jonah knew people in Israel who had been victims of that brutality. So Nineveh hadn't changed. The outlook for Jonah had not changed either. I mean, listen, if Jonah were to go preach to Nineveh and they did not accept, you think he would leave there alive? Probably not. Jonah would probably die if they didn't accept. If Jonah did go preach there and they did accept, then his nation's arch enemies would be spared from destruction. Just think about it. It would have been really good for Israel if Nineveh were blown to smithereens. It would have been very good for them. Think of it this way. Imagine your favorite team is about to play its arch rival. Your team is having a down year. Your arch rival is really, really good. Now it's the week before the big game. The other team, their arch rival, all the players get the flu. And they're sick. And they're miserable. They've got fevers. They're hacking. They're coughing. And at this rate, if your team plays their team, I mean, your team's going to wipe the floor with them. Right? But your coach, for some reason, has a huge supply of Tamiflu. And he knows this supply of Tamiflu will make the other team feel better. What does he do? Does he take that medicine to your rival, knowing that it may make them feel better, knowing that it may be bad for his own team to do so? Like, what would you do in that situation? That's kind of what Jonah's faced with here. God is calling him to take medicine to the opposing team. Here's what Jonah decided to do, verse 3. Jonah arose and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Jonah did it. God gave him a second chance, and he obeyed. And what's more, God's breaking down Jonah's heart, showing him his grace in the belly of that fish would make him a better minister of God's grace to others. Let's pause here and say clearly, Jonah got a second chance. It's Thanksgiving this week. We've got a lot of things to be thankful for. Can we thank God for second chances? Good place to say amen. Look, God didn't have to use Jonah. God could have let him drown. God could have used somebody else, but that's not what he did. God chased Jonah down. God worked in his life, and he made Jonah the kind of person who can minister to others. And the same is true with us. God doesn't have to use us. He doesn't have to use you. He doesn't have to use me. He could let us drown in our disobedience, drown in our stupidity, drown in our failures, but that's not what he does. God chases us down. He works in our lives to make us more like him, and he uses us to minister to others. Praise God that our God is a God of second chances for us too. This morning you may be thinking, there's no way God could use me. If God only knew how I had messed up. If God only knew what I'd done. There's no way God could use me. You know what? God already knows. God already sees. And he offers us the same invitation that he offered to Jonah. To turn and believe in him. If you're already a Christian, turn from the sins and remember what Jesus has already done for you. Because when we turn from those sins and believe in Jesus, God brings us into this community called the church. And He uses us in this mission that He's already doing in the world, mission He's already doing in our community. God can give you a second chance. Thank God for that. So God gave Jonah a second chance. Next, God gave Nineveh a second chance. Look back again in verse 3. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, 3 days' journey in breadth. Jonah began to go into the city, going a day's journey, and he called out, "Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown." And the people of Nineveh believed God. They called for a fast. They put on sackcloth, from the greatest of them to the least. The word reached the king of Nineveh, and he arose from his throne, removed his robe, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. And he issued a proclamation and published throughout Nineveh, "By the decree of the king and his nobles, let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock, taste anything. Let them not feed or drink, but let man and beast be covered with sackcloth, and let them call out mightily to God. Let everyone turn from his evil way and from the violence that is in his hands. Who knows? God may turn and relent and turn from his fierce anger so that we may not perish." When God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil way, God relented of the disaster He said He would do to them, and He did not do it. Jonah entered Nineveh for this 3-day preaching expedition. And as he walks into the city, I bet it was pretty clear to people, this guy's not from around here. I mean, Jonah dressed differently. Jonah spoke with a different accent. His skin, if you think of it, he was sitting in that stomach acid for 3 days. His skin was probably bleached. It was an odd color. He was walking in like Lurch from the Addams Family, right? And they're like, what's wrong with this guy? And when he arrived, he began to preach to all who would listen. He said this. He said, "Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown." 40 days, Nineveh shall be overthrown. It's possible here this is a summary of his sermon. Maybe he told a fish story. Maybe he went into more detail. But as it's written, this has to be one of the shortest sermons of all time. In the original language, this is a 5-word sermon. Many of you probably wished I preached a little more like Jonah, right? 5 words and we're out of here. That's pretty amazing. This sermon is short. It's sweet to the point. It's not sweet. It's very bitter. There's no sugarcoating. And on the surface, it seems like the worst sermon ever, right? No 3 points, no poem, no witty illustration, just straight doom and gloom. You're going to die in 40 days. Something crazy happened. So verse 5, the people of Nineveh believed God. They called for a fast. They put on sackcloth, from the greatest of them to the least. See, these wicked, cruel people in this godless culture, they believed Jonah. They repented of their sin. And it says here that they fasted. They called for a fast, which is kind of overlooked that. But that's a big deal for them. Fasting was not normal in their culture. Fasting is what the Hebrews did. They knew Jonah was speaking of the Hebrew God, so they worshiped him in a Hebrew way. So finally the message reached the king, and at this point we start getting worried, right? Because this is a dictatorship. The king could stamp out any revival if he wanted to. He could start bringing down the sword. But when he heard what Jonah said, he repents too. And he issues this citywide decree that everyone and every animal should fast from food, fast from drink, put on sackcloth, which is the sign of repentance and mourning, sit in ashes, same thing, and call out to God. And he's like, maybe, just maybe if we do this, God will spare us from destruction. And God saw this entire city, from the king on down to the least person, repenting and sorrow over the sin, and he relented. Verse 10, he says, And God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil way. God relented of the disaster He said He would do to them. And He did not do it. God saw their repentance. He held back His judgment. He gave Nineveh a second chance. It's hard for us to grasp how shocking it is that there would be a citywide revival in Nineveh. Just imagine God called you to go to Pyongyang, North Korea. All right, and you went. And you preached the gospel to everyone there, all the way up to Kim Jong-un. And the entire city, from Kim Jong-un on down, they repented. How amazing would that be if the entire city repented? Or imagine God called you to go to Las Vegas. And you preached the gospel there. The entire city, from the mayor on down, they repented and they closed down the casinos and the unsavory places and they cleaned up the town. How amazing would that be? If that happened, that would be an amazing, miraculous event. That would make headlines in newspapers. That was the kind of thing that happened in Nineveh. It would seem like if anyone seemed to be beyond the saving hand of God, it would have been Nineveh. People there, they worshipped false gods. They were cruel. They were violent. When God saved them, He shows us no one is beyond His saving hand. No one is so far gone that God cannot save them. Do you believe that this morning? Do you believe that no one is so far gone that God cannot save them? I think if most of us were honest, we'd say we believe it up here. We have a harder time believing it right here. So we believe in our heads that God can save anyone, but practically, we don't really believe God can save that person, that family member, that co-worker, that neighbor. You know how I know we don't believe it? Because we don't tell them. We don't reach out to them. We don't bring it up in conversation. We act like we really don't believe God can save them. I'm preaching to myself here too. Katie and I have people in our extended families who seem really, 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 really far gone. And I believe in my head God can save anybody, but when pressed, there's some people I'd just rather not talk to, period. Much less bring up things about Jesus in church. But the same God who saved a hardened Ninevite king can save those people in our family that we would least expect. The same God who saved these wicked Ninevites can save that person that you're going to see at Thanksgiving this week that you just want to avoid. Will we tell them about it? Will we be the Jonah that they need in their lives? We've been praying in recent weeks for the Bill Askew family. You recall, Bill Askew was Carrie Daniels' brother. You know, faith, and talking to AC about Bill, faith was never a priority in Bill's life. Bill was never involved in church. And this deeply bothered Miss Carrie. And one day, as Miss Carrie was pretty far along in her cancer, Bill came to visit. AC told me that he went outside and went and pilled in his shop for a while Bill visited with Carrie. After about an hour, AC came back in the house. And Bill said, I guess it's time for me to go. And so Bill left. AC never knew what that conversation was about. But in the years since Miss Carrie has passed, a lot has happened in Bill's own life. Bill got his own cancer diagnosis, and Bill just passed away a few weeks ago. Before he passed away, something changed in his life. He started attending Rock Springs Baptist Church. He was baptized. And later we found out what was behind this change. AC said he actually found out on the day of his pig picking. Someone told him that on the day he came to visit Miss Carrie laid it all out on the line. Miss Carrie shared the gospel with her brother. She told him he was a sinner and he needed to turn from his sins and trust in Jesus. And that day, Carrie and her cancer, she led her brother to the Lord. That day, Bill became a Christian. Bill gained hope. So much so that as he approached his own death, he told his new pastor at Rock Springs, he says, I used to be afraid of dying, but I'm not afraid anymore. God gave Bill a second chance because Miss Carrie was bold enough to tell him about it. She was like a Jonah, taking the truth to a person we would never expect to receive it. Church, we have people like that in our lives. People who desperately need God's second chance. People who desperately need to know that God can save them and give them hope. And we are the Jonahs that God has called to take it to them. God is a God of second chances. He's given each of us a second chance. And He can work through each of us to give second chances to others. Will you let Him lead you wherever He would go? This morning we're going to conclude with Hymn of Invitation 275. It's called I Surrender All. Now, we'll be tempted to just sing this song and mouth the words, but do you mean it? Jonah, the first time, he didn't surrender all until God chased him down. And finally, that second time he did. And God used him mightily. Will you surrender all in your life? And as we sing this, I encourage you to pray about who is that person that God has placed on your heart right now. Maybe God can use them in your life. Use you in their life if we surrender all. Let's pray. Father God, none of us deserves the second chance that you've given us. We all deserve to drown in our own disobedience and our own sin. God, you chased us down. You saved us from our sin. You made us your children. We thank God for that. God, there's other people that you want to chase down, and you want to use us to do that. Help us to be like obedient Jonah, going wherever you would lead in us, talking to whoever you would put in our hearts so they may come to faith. Help us to be like Miss Carrie, speaking the truth of the gospel to people who need it most. I pray if there's anyone here who has someone on their mind right now that they need to talk to this week. God, I've got someone on mind. I pray that right now we would commit to speaking to them, that you would already be working in their heart. I pray all this in Jesus' name.